Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connected with Jen and Shannon, where storytelling meets transformation. I'm Shannon, a communications trainer and coach.
And I'm Jen, a speech language pathologist and academic. Here's where leaders in neuroscience, philosophy, spirituality, and the arts come to share personal stories and powerful strategies for connection and what it means to be fully human.
So today we're welcoming Beena Sharma, a brilliant leader in the topic of adult development. And what she reminds us is that just because we're adults doesn't mean we have to stop learning, right? She tells us that as adults, when we start moving towards the uncomfortable, that's when the real growth happens.
You know, Shannon, what that makes me think of is when I first met Beena, I used to think that grown-ups were grown-ups. Once you were grown up, you were just grown up. And now I know that's not true at all. There are so many different ways, so many different lenses through which we can look at adult development. And it's really the challenges, it's the discomfort that we bump up against in life that allows us to grow, but we won't necessarily grow from if we don't encounter it in a certain way.
That's the thing. Like, even a few years ago, I used to think that living life was about being comfortable, things running smoothly, no catastrophes in my day, right? Where I can just sit down and relax and be comfortable. But the truth is, if we stay there, we're going to become stagnant.
True. You know, comfort isn't happiness. It's all about unfolding. It's all about the growth. And the growth happens in the discomfort.
I love thinking of adult development as an unfolding, right? It's a beautiful way to kind of think about our own selves kind of maximizing our full potential.
Love it.
A lot of what Beena talks about, we said, was vertical development. Now, what we're used to normally talking about is horizontal development. Okay, so horizontal development is like, I need to get more degrees, I need to get more credentials, or I need to stuff my brain with more information. Vertical development is different. It's actually dealing with maturity. And with vertical development, the thing that happens is you go deeper, right? A little bit more personal. And when you can do that, the magic really begins.
It's true. And we know that adult development is happening in the discomfort, in the noticing the discomfort. If you can hold it, notice it, observe it without judgment, with self-compassion, then you're on your way to growth.
And that's the thing. Who said adults can't grow, right? It's just a matter of being willing to kind of face these things with curiosity. When that message kind of reflects back to you, are you willing to hear what the universe is trying to tell you?
We keep hearing that. We keep hearing that. Let's focus on curiosity. It's true. Another great thing Beena does in her interview is she shares with us some amazing tools and strategies to integrate this growth into our own lives and our relationships.
Seriously, pay attention to these tools that she talks about. They're so practical. So, first things first, when we listen to this interview, we're going to think about self-compassion. Let's be curious about what it means to be kind to ourselves. We're also going to think about those moments in life where we actually have the opportunity to move towards the discomfort for personal growth. And finally, Beena tells this beautiful story about her journey and her daughter. And I think a lot of people in our audience are really going to enjoy it.
So as you're listening, notice if there's any discomfort. Be kind and compassionate with yourself and realize it might be an opportunity for growth, an invitation for change. Let's dive into our conversation with the brilliant Beena Sharma. Beena Sharma is founder of the Vertical Development Academy, enhancing leadership development through vertical development theory, measurement, and practice. We'll learn more about that as things go on. Beena is a gifted master coach, consultant, teacher, and thought leader in adult development. Beena trains, certifies, and coaches in the vertical development framework.
We first encountered Beena's work through the lens of vertical development, but what stands out most is her invitation to come home to ourselves while we grow. This isn't development as self-improvement, it's development as deep remembering as we become more human.
Today, Beena will share a transformational story, the tools that have supported her integration over time, and current projects she's working on. Beena, you're doing some incredible work as the founding president of Vertical Development Academy. Can you tell us what you're currently working on and what's really exciting for you?
Yes, sure. First of all, I want to say how happy I am to be here with you. It's very exciting, just the initiative that you're on. And I'm very interested to listen to all the other guests that you have conversations with. So thank you for inviting me. So I feel like what I'm working on is what I've always been working on. I mean, for the past 30 years, I think my passion has been really exploring the question, what does it mean to be a full human being? What does it mean to actualize what our possibilities are? And I've been curious throughout my years of working in this field about what are the barriers that come in our way and how do we know them, how do we observe them, how do we reflect them, and how do we work not just to remove the barriers or to surmount them, but to connect with life in a way that they're not barriers anymore, but they are invitations or mirrors of reality that are showing us what we need to see so that we can be more of who we can be. And that's a reframe. Normally, when we're thinking about growth, we think, oh, I have these blocks and I have to remove them. And I think, at least through the work of vertical development, which we'll talk about in a moment, our blocks are reality telling us, look, and our barriers and the blocks are mirrors to ourselves. They show us parts of ourselves that if we are open and we are willing to meet reality, reality teaches us. So I hope that's an interesting initial opening to our conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Beena. An invitation to become more human is kind of what I'm focused on right now.
Like you were saying, Shannon, the notion of an invitation, a barrier, not thinking of our challenges as barriers, but invitations or mirrors, Beena. That is so beautiful. Thank you.
You are so welcome. And that's actually an aspect of what we might call a more mature perspective taking. When we are still early in our sense making, when we have barriers, then we think that's a bad thing. We can feel defensive. We can feel bad about ourselves. Sometimes we see other human beings as barriers. But as we grow and as we mature, we begin to see that these barriers are portals. They're door openers for us to see aspects of ourselves or to find new ways. And when we see other people as barriers earlier, as we develop and become more mature, we see that other people are mirrors also, mirrors in whose light we can see ourselves and begin to see the truth of who we are, what they are, and what's happening between us, and to be open to all of that and not, I would say, not reject any aspect of life, but to welcome all aspects of life as invitations.
Thank you, Beena. Your work has touched so many lives, but we'd like to start today with a more personal lens. Could you share a personal transformational story, something that really made a difference in your life?
Yes, there are several, and I'm just thinking which one I should pick. I think I'll pick the one that got me on my path. And maybe later, if there's a chance, I can share another very significant story. So it was actually the birth of my daughter. I was 25, and until then, I was in a way still looking for my path. What do I want to do in the world? When I was younger, I had wanted to be a doctor, and then I didn't get into medical school, and I was devastated. And then I ended up, doing some marketing. It just wasn't satisfying. And I decided that I would find perhaps a field where I would start my own business because my father was an entrepreneur. So all of this was happening. And then I had gotten married and then I had my baby. And I just cannot tell you, nothing prepares you, right? Because you are both moms. No matter how much you think about it and you imagine the baby, or you imagine who you're going to be, and you imagine what motherhood is like, nothing prepares you. And so when she was born, I was completely ecstatic. And as I was raising her for the first, 12 to 24 months, it became very important to me. How do we raise children? How do we grow our children? How do we educate them? Because I was thinking, about the possibilities that she could actualize as she grew up. And that really got me interested in education. And I started reading, thinkers and philosophers, How Children Learn, Maria Montessori, J. Krishnamurti, Rudolf Steiner, just the philosophy of education. And I realized that was my work in the world, is to see how do we grow. But at that time, my interest was in children because I had my daughter. And I decided to do a master's in education. And I enrolled for it at the Madras University. I was raised in India and I was in India at the time. Enrolled in a master's course, and I was sort of very excited that, yes, this is what I want to be doing. When I came across a small entrepreneurial outfit in India that were offering alternative education programs for children in schools. And I just happened to meet them, and their entire thesis was our education system is not helping our children to really think and learn. It's just cramming them with a lot of information, just giving them a lot of content. And then all they're expected to do is just regurgitate that, just repeat the things, the information and sort of the factoids, that they get. Whereas what they were wanting to do was actually spark the child's natural curiosity to think, to be creative, to develop critical thinking, to develop skills to interpret, to make sense, to know, to learn, to be curious. And so they were designing programs based on Edward de Bono's work, who's considered to be the father of deliberate thinking, developing the idiom of thinking skills. So I got so interested in that. And this is the other thing that I discovered, that I'm a practitioner at heart who loves good theory. And so I had this choice. Do I go into the field? Because they offered me a job. They said, if you're interested, you seem to be really interested in this. We're looking for people who would learn and communicate these programs and be facilitators in classrooms for 9 to 12-year-olds. So you could come and just start learning about thinking skills and teach thinking skills. And so I had this choice. Do I go into a university and do a 2-year master's in education and understand the theory and the philosophy? Or do I go into the classroom and interact with children? To me, it was no contest. I just went into the classroom because I am a practitioner at heart. And I think it's really important that whatever we practice is founded in sound thought, meaning, philosophy, and theory. So I did that for the next 7 to 8 years. So that was the beginning of my journey. And after the first year of teaching children thinking skills, realized that I was more interested in developing the programmatic design of the curriculum. And so I became a part of the concept team, and I started developing more and more modules and programs to develop different aspects of thinking skills. And then I got a scholarship. I went to the UK, I got trained with a thought leader, came back and started expanding that work, not just to the children, but also to teachers. Because what we were doing is so you imagine a classroom, there are 8 classes, children come in and they take English and math and geography and history and PT. And then they have this one class in between where they are taught to think. But that's only once a week. And what we are teaching in terms of how to think and ask questions, that was being undermined by all the other classes where the information was being just sort of dumped, on the children. And so I realized that we need to work with teachers. We need to orient them. We need to teach them the thinking skills that we're teaching children. And we need to show them how to integrate a thinking curriculum within their subject matter. And so I started doing teacher training. And then I realized, well, children are in the school just 7 hours a day, and parents are not knowing how to support the thinking capacities of their children. So I started doing parent workshops. So started working with children, parents, teachers, parents, and then we started doing some work with the whole school system. So in a way, that was also my journey from individual to system, to working with the whole environment and system. And in that process, I realized that it was more challenging for me to work with adults, and that I was more suited to work with adults because of my capacity to think abstractly and the fact that adults needed more support in a way because children already have some natural capabilities. And so not to not work with children, but I just thought I need to work with adults. And then I started working with leaders in corporations. So that's a bit about just the transformational event in my life and how that got me started on this journey of human development.
And that journey of human development began with a human life.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely amazing.
So let me ask you this, Beena. This story is great, and I know it's going to absolutely resonates with me, and I'm certain that it's going to resonate with our listeners. You mentioned something very interesting about your path from, your child all the way to working with adults, and that you found that adults needed more support. And I want to dig in a little bit there because I think the same thing. But I want to know why. Why do you think adults need more support? Is it this like lack of imagination we have, or that we've gotten into the rhythm of life in a certain way that we don't widen our lens to look? What is your thinking around that?
Yeah, maybe I would reframe that myself. Not so much that adults need more support, but that adults need to learn also that thinking can be developed. I think the adults that I was working with were products of the same system. They were also taught that information was king, and they thought that to know more was a better thing, but it was actually what do you do with the information that you have, and how does that impact your own life? How does that impact your relationships? And if you're raising children, are you thinking about how you are developing them? So it was more introducing the idiom that thinking can be taught, thinking can be facilitated, better thinking, better decision making, creativity can be taught. And we were not taught that. I wasn't taught that in my school.
Mm-mm.
And so I felt that the parents and teachers that I was interacting with did not have those opportunities just like me.
Well, Beena, I have to say, I learned that from you, that we can continue to learn and develop
Yeah.
as adults. It sounds crazy to say that now, but until I started learning from you and thinking, thinking along the same lines that you were teaching me to think, I was like, wow, I as an adult can change so much rather than being this static being, um, with my same thought patterns. Just even opening your mind enough to think, oh yeah, I can still actually learn and grow and change as an adult.
And sometimes I think it's as simple as that. Isn't that amazing? And it doesn't mean that you weren't changing and learning and growing, but you weren't in a way framing that for yourself. You weren't aware of that. It was happening organically. We might even say unconsciously. So I always say that even in my work in vertical development, which we haven't defined yet, but we will, is that people are continuing to develop vertically, whether they know it or not, because life is growing us. And yet becoming aware that this is something we can know and we can actively, intentionally, deliberately learn about and guide ourselves it's a monumental leap. And we say that that idea is psychoactive. What that means is if you know that, oh yeah, I'm not who I was 15 years ago. I'm not, 15 years later, I'm going to be somebody different. And in this process, I can steward my own growth. Just that idea is psychoactive in that it will activate and accelerate your growth. And I can say this from my personal experience. Since I've been working in adult development, I know that I have grown much more than if I had not been working in adult development because it's natural. I start applying what I'm learning to myself. And if I'm teaching it, then I better apply my own teaching. Otherwise, I'm going to be an ineffective, inauthentic, and out of integrity teacher. So because I teach, I also am more called to be integrated with what I'm teaching. And of course, they say, right, teaching is the best way of learning. And so that's also one thing that I would advocate. If there's anything you want to learn, start teaching it.
All right, Beena. So can you help us explain what is vertical development?
I know. We've used that word or that term, and that's the work that I do. And in a way, it's a simple term that describes what we're talking about, which is how do we grow and mature in our adulthood? And we contrast vertical development with horizontal development. So, what are the traditional ways in which we see when an adult is growing? Traditionally, if you look at even leadership development, if you look at management literature, leadership development is about understanding oneself, understanding one's strengths and weaknesses. And typically, leadership theories will talk about here are 6 qualities of good leadership. So, what is what are your strengths? Or what is your style of leadership? Here are 7 traits of good leadership, or here are 9 styles of successful leadership. So, what's your style? And the invitation is to become aware of one's own approach, one's own style, and then to expand one's repertoire so that you're not stuck in one type, and to expand your repertoire so that you can be more adaptive in a way across the different styles and you have more strengths. But fundamentally, this is the key. Fundamentally, no style of leadership or no particular approach is better than the other. They are all considered equally valuable. So we call that a horizontal model. That's one aspect of the horizontal model, or it's a flat model where no one is better than the other, and you're just expected to expand your repertoire as a leader. So the other aspect of horizontal leadership is also about having more information, having more skills. So, skill building and becoming more effective, becoming more successful at achieving your goals. And that is contrasted with vertical development, where vertical development, it's not just about skill building or getting more information or having more degrees or having more credentials. It is about the level of perspective you can take on any situation. It's about how self-aware are you? It is about how much capacity do you have to deal with conflict? It is about what kind of change can you catalyze in a system that you're part of? Now, you can teach these as skills, but again, you can even get a certificate in emotional intelligence and walk away thinking that you are now more emotionally intelligent as before. But if you end up, let's say, being a good teacher in emotional intelligence, but when you come home and you are unable to understand why your teenage son is angry with you, or you're unable to give feedback to your spouse, or you're unable to get feedback or interpret people's behaviors in terms of how they are seeing you, then you're actually not emotionally intelligent. You've learned the skill, but it hasn't translated into how you've shifted just your relationships and your way of being. So, vertical development is when not only do we learn more, but it changes the way we see the world. It changes our beliefs and assumptions about ourselves and other people. So, just take me. I was saying that, I had a baby and I was so excited thinking, oh, this is the way I'm going to raise my child. And then 5 years later, now that I've been a mom for 5 years, I suddenly realized, God, I had no idea. This is what it takes. And now that my daughter is nearing 40, I still more recently have come into this reality that I had no idea what it would take to parent a 40-year-old. And is it even parenting? It's not. So that's when we have ideas about the world, we have ideas about ourselves, and then reality will challenge us. And we have to come up with a new way of understanding our experience. And when we come up with a new story about what is going on, we are developing, we are becoming more mature so that as we go along, we are more capable and we are more adequate to responding to all of life. So, vertical development is about being more mature. It's about responding to all of life encounters. It's not just horizontal development, which is learning skills or getting credentials. and then being successful in a narrow sort of an arena. So I hope that's helpful to as a distinction.
Beena, this resonates so deeply with me and just the work that I'm doing as a faculty member. So I educate students who are interested in becoming speech language pathologists, right? And the issue I often bump up against is all of the work that you need to do to be great in your field outside of the skills that you need to be a speech pathologist, right? So what I think I heard you say was that when we're thinking of vertical development, we're thinking of this not skills necessarily, but the beliefs and the assumptions that may change so that, as you had mentioned, I might know all about how it is to be emotionally intelligent, but if I can't relate to the world in a way that's emotionally intelligent, then who am I and what have I learned, right?
Exactly. That reminds me of this other story that was also transformational to me. So I talked about teaching creative thinking to children and then moving to doing leadership development in creative problem solving. And I did that for 3 years. I was teaching how to be creative, techniques for creative thinking, improving thinking skills of managers and leaders. Believe me, it was the same concepts that I was teaching 9 to 12-year-olds. I was teaching leaders and managers. So I did that for 3 years, and I began to notice that I would do 3-day workshops, pretty intense, all day new practices. And then I would bump into somebody who'd taken my workshop maybe a few months later, and I would be curious, hey, how's it going? Because I'm pouring my heart out. I'm learning how to teach this. I'm teaching it. I'm applying it. So I'm curious to say, is this changing something in your life? And repeatedly over the 3 years, the times I would meet leaders who'd gone through my program would say, yeah, it was great, but I'm not able to apply it really. And I would say, why not? They would say, well, all of these reasons would keep coming up. My boss doesn't understand it. My colleagues don't have the same language. I don't have the time. And then I don't know how to do it by myself. I learned the concepts, but I don't have anybody to practice with. And I mean, can you imagine the idea would be, oh, I have to then stand out and do something quite different and then tell people I'm being creative? I mean, how does that work in a kind of situation? And I'm not equipped to train or teach my colleagues. So it was such a shock to me that by the end of 3 years, I realized I'm wasting my time. And I realized that I am not interested in teaching. I'm interested in learning. And that got me really curious about, so how do we learn and what is learning? So if I just go to a workshop and somebody teaches me skills, so can I say that I've learned it? No, it says that I know the concepts. It says I can talk about it, but if I can't practice it, then I haven't actually learned it. And that's when my whole focus shifted and I really got interested in adult learning. And then I got trained in organizational development. I was facilitating groups in translating what they had learned as information or skills into actually making those capabilities were that they were demonstrably better at. So that to me was a huge paradigm shift.
And Shannon, I have to share, Shannon and I have shared this conversation. Shannon works with adults and students who are learning to communicate better, to be better presenters, better communicators. And we have talked in depth about the difference between being a great communicator and knowing the skills of being a great communicator.
Yeah, I mean, we can teach the skills. We can, till we're blue in the face, but until someone actually walks through the door, experiences it themselves, they just don't understand it. So,
Absolutely.
it's kind of nowadays I'm seeing a lot of this experiential learning, right? This is something we practice at CIIS, and I find it fascinating. It is the new way, I think, that education is headed in this direction where, in order to integrate all of these ideas, like we need better skills, better tools to kind of incorporate that into our daily lives.
Yeah, and experiential learning has been there for a long time, ever since even I was teaching. It's just that it hasn't found its way in the mainstream.
Mhm.
There's a difference between the like there's been a lot of work in the fringes, in the edges, where new approaches are being used. There's experiential learning, there's deep personal work that combines with skill building, and even what we call human process work, where you're really coming to understand who you are and understand other people and learn to have a functional, healthy, evolving relationship. So that work has been there. It just hasn't found its way into the mainstream.
How are we going to get it into the mainstream, Beena?
Like this, what you're doing. This is
Thank you. That was the right answer, Beena. Definitely the right answer.
for sure. So, Beena, in your bio, you talk about measurements. Can you explain that a little bit more to our audience?
Yes, thank you. And measurement is a tricky word in a way, even though we say that we measure adult development. And in some ways, when we do this work, we do use an instrument to have people respond to, which gives them an idea, or it's like a scientific mirror where they can actually see how far have they come, how developed are they. So that measurement answers that question. How developed are you? If we're saying there's vertical development, then we'd like to know, well, how far along am I? And this theory was empirically based. So the research was done in the early 60s, where a professor from the University of Washington in St. Louis, Dr. Jane Lovinger, she was a psychometrician, and she started doing this research where she created what is called the sentence completion test, and she had thousands of people respond to it. And she was looking at sense making and how she called it ego development theory, how people make sense of who they are and how does that change? What stories do they tell about their life and about the world, and how do those stories change? And what was really interesting is she saw that there were large groups of people who shared the same story. They didn't know each other, but their responses to the questions revealed the same story. And then there was a whole other set of people who shared the story, but that story was significantly different from the previous story. And so she saw this pattern of evolving stories that human beings tell as they grow into more and more mature ways of being. So I'll give you an example since parenting is a theme. One of those prompts is raising a family. So you might hear a lot of people say, well, raising a family is hard, it's difficult, it's a responsibility, it's a pain, it sucks, it's challenging. All of that is a similar story. And then you might have another group that says, well, raising a family is hard but enjoyable. It's challenging, but it's such an opportunity. Or it's difficult, but I just love it. So you already see that the perspective taking is not looking at just one thing and how difficult it is, but it's also looking at the other side. And then you might have another group of people who might say, well, raising a family is challenging and it shows me how much I need to grow. So now you can see that perspective is not just thinking about raising a family where as a parent you're raising somebody else, but you're also seeing that something is happening to you. It's not just you are doing something to others, but in that process, something is happening to you as well. So this is just so you can already see in these three, there is an evolving perspective. The third one is a more broader, more expansive, and in a way more closer to reality because more connected to what's actually going on, more of what's going on. So this is what we can measure. So if you wanted, anybody could take this instrument and there is a method for scoring the instrument and you get a profile. And the theory describes 8 stages like this. There are 8 stages of development, and then it tells you where you are. And it doesn't tell you your farthest stage. It tells you your automatic stage of development because that's something that we're unconscious about. So it might give you a certain stage, and there are parts of us that are always ahead. We all know this, There are parts of us that are ahead. Times we feel we are more capable. Other times we get triggered, we fall back. And then most times we are operating at our normal sort of in our normal way. So you might say that we have these three stations that we're all sort of traversing. There is an earlier self that I fall back to, and I know I shouldn't be yelling at my child, but I did it. And I think, oh God, why did I do it? Next time I'm not going to do it. And then other times you may not, but you fall back. So there's that earlier self, which is not fully integrated. And then you have your current way of operating where you're making sense, you feel functional, you feel capable of meeting the demands of your life. And then there is a part of you that's already ahead, that's already looking at what's next. You may not be aware of it, but life is teaching you, and those insights may not even be accessible to you, but that growth is happening. We are evolving. And sometimes we surprise ourselves and we surprise other people. We come into a new situation and we know how we know how to deal with it in a mature way, even though we've never faced it before. How do we know that? We step into more mature ways of being through our life experiences. So the measurement reflects where you might be in these stages, and that's very helpful. And not everybody reaches the last stage, and that's not the purpose. The purpose is, I feel, is to give us a frame that we can use as guideposts. If this is the trajectory of development, then I can guide myself through this. I can see what's next. I can notice when I fall back. And that's hugely helpful.
As a leader, one of the most difficult things I find in my own experience is meeting people where they are. This seems like a tool to help leadership kind of identify where their teams are, right? Each individual.
Without judging them, without condemning them.
Correct.
In fact, it does actually behoove us to use this framework ethically. And that's why it's a very sensitive instrument. It's a very sensitive theory. And I sometimes feel it's not for everybody because there's so much, there is so much nuance and complexity that it holds. And when I'm teaching this framework to coaches, we take 3 days to just orient people to all the ways in which you shouldn't be doing this work. All the ways in which you should not be holding this work. You should not label people. You should not push people. You should not try to get them up the ladder. There is no ladder of development. And yet we make a case that by tailoring, meeting people exactly where they are, understanding how they're seeing their life, how they're identifying themselves now, how could they challenge their assumptions? You could meet them and actually facilitate them coming into the next level perspective if you were aware of it. So I feel it's our responsibility as human beings to access the best research out there, the best knowledge we have out there, the best approaches we have out there to begin to apply it to our own development and others' development.
I love the way you're saying you're inviting people to challenge themselves to continue to develop without judgment. Like you said, there's no ladder. And we would love to continue to develop, right? What role does adult development play in the collective challenges we're facing today? The political challenge, ecological, social challenges. So, for example, from what I've learned from you, I truly believe that adult development is what we need to raise consciousness socially, culturally, but it's all going to start with ourselves. And it can't start from a place of criticism and judgment of ourselves. We all working toward developing ourselves to the next space and the next place might be what saves us. And how do we get there? How does this play a role in all of these global changes that we really want to make?
Yeah, that's a very, very big question. It's also broad. It's easy to get into abstractions, because there is not one we that is going to get there, which is one place. So just to sort of unpack it a little bit, and maybe I'll use the example when COVID hit, and we didn't know what hit us, on the planet. And, there was all kinds of reactions and responses to COVID. So one thing we can see is how do we react or respond to a challenge like COVID? it's important for us to notice that our reactions and responses are expressing or demonstrating the way we are making sense of it. And so there were a whole group of people who, when COVID hit, were concerned most about making sure that they had the supplies at home, making sure they had toilet paper, even fighting over toilet paper. I mean, that was the most important thing to them. And then there was another whole set of people who were most interested in following the rules and what are we supposed to do? Tell me what to do and I'll do it. I have to wear a mask. I have to, distance by 6 feet, just somebody needs to tell me, and then I need to make sure that we're all doing what we need to do so we can be safe. So that's another sort of worldview of response. And then there was another group that got into techniques and processes of how to address all the difficult. How do you make a good face mask? There were lots of YouTube videos. This is a good way to make a face mask. That was the most important thing: is how to get better at dealing with all the risks and the dangers. And then there was also, along with that, reporting on all the statistics. So many people are dying, or so many people are infected, or this country has these practices, and these are the best practices. So that when you respond like that, it means that's the most important thing to you. And then there's another layer where people started meeting in groups to dialogue about how is this affecting your life? What kind of support do you need? What's your story? And having more connections, creating more communities. That's a whole different way of responding, or adding more layer, adding more, taking care of more human needs, not just the technicalities of how do you make a mask, or not just about make sure you have enough supplies at home. So do you see the difference? So this is how human beings at different stages respond to global challenges. We can be protective, we can be rule followers, we can be, we can be those who are looking at just getting data and, techniques, or we can be moving into communities and really trying to make collective sense. These are 4 ways, 4 stages of development, and there are more. So there is no monolithic we. There is no one kind of humanity that we can address. So we have to look at, in any particular context, what is the system, how is the system responding, and how do you support people who are making sense from an earlier stage? How do you support them? They need to feel safe. Let's give them safety. This other group, they need to have rules. Let's give them some rules. But there are others who need more. So let's meet people where they are, see people as innocent, and support them. And when people are supported, then when they feel that their needs are being met, then there's a natural unfolding into the next stage of development. So that's one answer, one response to such a big question.
Oh. Just those 2 phrases really stick out to me, Beena. One is, there is no monolithic we. Right. There's no one answer here. There is no one. And wow, that's going to take me a minute to wrap my head around, because I tend to think of this monolithic we like this one great, wonderful thing that's going to apply to all of us and make everything better.
And there is no one us. One has to work within the context of the collective one is part of. No matter how much we care about everything that's going on in the rest of the world. And there we have to be smarter in different ways. We have to look at influencing people in power, influencing systems, influencing institutions that have embedded these old, immature ways of thinking and being. And we may not be able to influence that from very far away, but we can within the systems that we are operating. And these 8 stages of development are great to parse. We can say that this monolithic we has 8 shapes. And we know that research generally in the general population, about 80 to 85% really fall into the first 4 stages. So we know our major work is there.
And the thought that you shared around, no matter who you are and where you are, you've got to feel safe to grow. is so beautiful, Beena. Thank you.
You know, I have a young man in my distant family system who has been struggling with addiction. And it's been years, and there was no way that I tried to help him. The family system is dysfunctional, like most people in my generation. We weren't taught how do you raise children. Nowadays, I feel parents are much more aware and alive to dialoguing with children. Our parents never talked to us. Anyhow, so difficult family system. Older sister left the family system, got married. Parents still continue in the same dynamic, and there's a lot of conflict at home. And I tried to help him. I said, I'm going to help you. I'm going to support you for a couple of years, but you need to leave the house. You need to stay somewhere else so that you can find your own place. This was when he was 27, 28, 29. He needed to have his own space. So I tried to support him, but that didn't work, and he came right back. And I just recently spoke to his sister. He's now 32, I think, or 33. I recently spoke to his sister, and she said, there's a lot of change in him. So I said, how did that happen? He said, well, first of all, I realized that I was constantly asking him that he needs to get a job and needs to get out of this habit and he needs to be better. And that just wasn't, it wasn't working. And I was angry with him. And she said now she's got two kids. He comes home, the kids love him, he loves the kids, and he's just learning to socialize in an environment that is reasonably stable. And she said this thing to me without knowing anything about vertical development. She said, he feels safe in my home. So he's beginning to relax. He comes to her home twice in a week, 2 days in a week, and the 5 days he's with his parents. And when he goes back, he's back into the conflict. But at least he has a space where he begins to feel safe. And now he said for the first time, he himself, after some 8 years, has been talking to her and her husband saying, maybe I look for some work, all on his own. And this is after 8 years of haranguing. And so you just cannot underestimate the power of connection and safety. And so, from a developmental point of view, he was at that earliest survival stage, not feeling safe. And in order to move into the next stage, which is what we call group centric, where you are basically doing what a good person does, live in a family, have a job, pay your taxes, go do work, earn some money, take care of your needs. That's basic. That's foundational. It's the foundation of civilization. And he needed to be safe to be able to step into that frame.
Beena, thank you so much for helping us understand this complex topic. But how can we help our listeners really integrate this information into their daily lives? What are some tools, some practices, some skills that we can help our audience develop to kind of get through this in their lives?
So that's a really great question. I think so. I would come at it in a couple of ways. So one is you can use this understanding of vertical development quite explicitly to help yourself. And like I said, to guide yourself through the stages of development. So that would mean to get familiar with this work. What are the stages of development? There are different theories. There are 4 or 5 different theories. They cut up the stages in different ways. There's one framework that has 5 stages. Our framework has 8 stages. There's another framework has 12 stages. But to get curious, and read about it and then begin to see how does this apply to my life. So you can do it explicitly looking at vertical development as a framework that you are applying. But if you were not interested in that, because not everybody is interested in a psychological model, then just in terms of your own life experiences, the couple of things I would suggest is when things are difficult, then to not move away from the difficulty, but to move towards the difficulty.
Wow, yeah.
We tend to avoid people that are difficult to interact with. We tend to avoid situations that are uncomfortable. We tend to avoid even having that dialogue with ourselves when we are in conflict. And so the one big thing that anybody can do is to remember this and then to move towards the discomfort and be willing to sit in discomfort and to be willing to explore it. And that's not easy. That's the probably single most important thing you can do for your own development, is to ask those questions. The assumptions that are operating, that are bringing you pain and sort of bringing you suffering, if you will. So that's one. The second thing I would say, which is almost as important, is to take radical responsibility for your own experience. At early stages, we tend to externalize. When we're unhappy, we say, "Oh, they did it to me. My parents did it, or my spouse is like this, or, my boss is like this, or we externalize. Taking radical responsibility means you don't externalize it. You don't put it on someone else, or you don't put it on the world outside, but you really look at yourself and see, well, how am I making sense of this that is making it difficult for me? How am I contributing to this? And there's always a contribution system when things are dysfunctional. And instead of looking at how are others causing it, we really look at, well, how am I contributing? And am I willing to own that? Am I willing to be honest with myself? So that's taking radical responsibility. And then the third thing I might say is owning when one messes up. Just to say, I'm sorry, yeah, I messed up. Yeah, I can see if somebody is upset with us. Yeah, I can see I could have done that differently. And that's a big deal. It's not easy to do that. But when you do that, you begin to see there's an ease, there's an ease within yourself, there's an ease within the other person. And then the real owning comes when you can ask the question, how can I make it right? Even if you think the other person was in the wrong, it's because you own your part in it. And so you can make that part right. And then it's up to the other person. And most people respond. If you try to make your part right, they will make their part right too. So I think that would be the most simple and most, what shall I say, important invitation.
And very practical. I feel like our listeners can really wrap their heads around all three of those ideas. I think living in the uncomfortable, right? Like when I figured that out, that when I could actually sit and be uncomfortable, that's where the growth happens.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
I've got one further question to ask you. What
Yeah.
if you are the type of person, though, who tends to blame yourself when you shouldn't necessarily be the person to blame? Where do you stand with that, Beena?
Yes. And so just like we're asking to be kind to other people and to make it right, you extend that same thing to you. Be kind to yourself. How do you make it right with yourself?
Sometimes that self-compassion we have for other people, it just flows right out of us. However, when we reflect that back into ourselves, it becomes much more difficult.
Yes, and we are socialized into thinking that to focus on oneself means you're being selfish, and you just have to constantly take care of everybody else. Being selfish is different from self-care and self-compassion. And we interpret self-compassion sometimes in being selfish, and there's virtue in self-compassion.
Oh, I love that. There's virtue in self-compassion. There's virtue in self-care, right?
Yes,
I say rest, is a job. This is important, put that on your list.
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Beena. One of the first questions we want to ask you is how could you, Beena, from your perspective and point of view, imagine a new bliss for the world? What does that look like to you? A new bliss.
A new bliss for the world.
We're trying to imagine the world that we want, right? So we want all of our guests to help us imagine, this future world that we're looking towards. So then we have something to go towards.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And what's coming up for me is what I would want as new bliss for the world is for human beings to see themselves as nature and to be connected, to be one with nature, not just nature, but to see oneself as the evolving cosmos. That would be where we are all innocent and we're all part of the manifestation of the source of creation. To me, that would be the new bliss for the world.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, so Beena, at the end of all of our interviews thus far, we've asked our guests to identify one word or phrase that they're going to take forward with them from our conversation. The thing that I'm taking forward with me today is something that Beena said when she was saying that roadblocks or barriers that we face in our lives are actually invitations to become more human.
I am carrying away actually is living into the new bliss for the world. How do I live into the bliss I want to see in the world? So thank you for that.
Thank you, Beena. And Shannon, those are great. I am going to go with something you shared with us, Beena, moving toward discomfort with self-compassion, right? I can observe, I can sit in discomfort and observe it and learn from it, and also be compassionate with myself around it.
I love that addition when you say that really completes it. Thank you.
Yes, it does. Well, this was a fabulous interview, ladies. What a conversation. Thank you so much, Beena, for joining us today. It's been so fun.
You are so welcome. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and good luck with all the conversations.
Thank you, Beena. Wow, amazing.
Okay, everyone, we have something really important to ask, right? Jen and Shannon are over here trying to save the world, and we need your help.
This is how you can help us. Go to Spotify, go to Apple Podcasts, go to YouTube, and hit like and subscribe. And let us know what you think.
And here's the thing, we're building a community, and this is the first step.
We can't wait to see you there.